So the primary objective was to bridge the gap between students and industry. So some of the activities that we do was to seek vacation work for students. We need to guide this internal audit profession, but more specific, guide the designation internal audit.
Yes.
Value is in the eyes of the beholder,
Yes.
right? I mean, values can be subjective. What you see as value, I might not see it, and vice versa. What are the things that are likely to happen during an election season? You are going to have an increase in budget provisions.
Yes.
You are going to likely have an increase in spending because then people want to deliver. I mean, elections are all about delivery of services to people, right?
Good day, fellow internal auditors. Thank you for having us. Welcome to our INbrief podcast. My name is Lwandile Mkanyelwa. It's good to have everyone. This is a podcast where we share insights with fellow internal auditors about what's happening in the industry, about the different industries that we serve as internal auditors, and about everything internal audit related, really. And today we're speaking to our esteemed board member, Thokozani Sihlangu. He's been a board member before a couple of times. I think this is your second stint, if I'm not mistaken, but you'll correct me. So yeah, welcome, and I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. It's quite an honor to be here at your INbrief and to have this INbrief conversation with you. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So tell us about Thokozani, first of all. Who's Thokozani? For anyone who's watching this or who is meeting you for the first time, who would you say Thokozani is, rather?
Yeah. So Thokozani is a man or a boy at the time who was born in rural KZN. So I was born in a hospital called Ngwelezani in Mpangeni. So we stayed, my mother was studying in a University of Zululand, so we were staying in an area called Wadlangezo. So that's where I was born. And then when she finished schooling, we then relocated to Mpumalanga at an area called Denelton. And that's where I really was raised, grew up, studied there. And then later on, the place, the area was later, through the demarcation, converted into Limpopo. So the province is Limpopo now, because we're in the border between Mpumalanga and Limpopo. So really that's where I grew up. Completed my matric, and then I, at the time, wanted to study and to start a life of my own as an independent man. And then I went to an area called George in the Western Cape, and that's where I started my tertiary life. So I studied there. Then I went to Eastern Cape to complete. And then after Eastern Cape, I then started my formal employment with Ernst & Young here in Gauteng. So, I mean, there's a couple of provinces that I've been in there.
All over.
If you can calculate, you know. But what I've learned throughout was just the ability to deal with different kinds of people and different kinds of cultures. So, for instance, now I can speak fluently 5 different languages, and the rest I do understand, with the exception of, I think even Afrikaans I do understand a bit. And I think that's what, with the different locations, brought to me as an individual. And yeah, I think in my professional life, I started my formal employment with Ernst & Young in 2012, doing a vacation work at the time. And then I started permanently with them in 2013. I had the opportunity to also be seconded to London in the United Kingdom. When I came back, I was really passionate about the banking sector. I then joined First Rand Bank, later moved to Absa Bank, and then went to Standard Bank. So I've been to 3 of the big 4 banks in South Africa. And currently I'm a chief audit executive at Postbank, which is earmarked or now promulgated to be our first state bank as a country. So that's where I'm at. But I think one highlight also for me now, also one thing to mention was that I became a CAE at a very early age, under 35, which was, I think, a proud moment for me, but also for the generation, or for my generation, to say it's actually possible for us to actually climb to these layers in an organization at an early age. All we need is to obviously step up, roll up our sleeves, and do the work, and the rest will come. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, awesome. Now, I must say I've been following you from a distance. Very much impressed with how you've progressed. It's great to see, especially for a young person who's made it to the top echelons of internal audit, and someone who really understands internal audit, who's an internal auditor through and through. And what I mean by that is someone who started as an internal auditor and went all the way to a CAE, because oftentimes you get people who've done something else, but when it comes to the top echelons, the C-suite, they take someone from somewhere else, someone that was doing something else because of perhaps the lack of leadership skills within the internal audit. I don't know, but that's always the issue. But I want us to talk. We'll get back to that. I want us to maybe start with internal audit.
Yeah.
What made you choose internal audit? Did you choose it, or did it choose you?
So I think for me, the fortunate part was that from now they call them grades, from standard 5, grade 7, we had to choose, because I was the generation that introduced OBE at the time. Yeah, what was called OBE. So, but when I was at grade 7, we had to choose a stream to say, okay, when you go to a high school, what stream of study do you want to follow? And I remember having a conversation with my brother, and my brother sort of convinced me to say, you know what, go with auditing, chartered accountant. So I grew with that.
Okay.
I want to study accounting or commerce stream. I want to become an auditor. I want to become a chartered accountant. But at the time, I did not know the distinction between internal and external.
Yes.
You know? So I studied accounting. So when I went to university at NMMU, or Nelson Mandela University now it's called, I then studied accounting. In my second year of study, through reading, I then came across to say, actually, there's a certain part of auditing which is called internal. And internal auditors are those people who operate within the organization, advise the organization, help the organization to sort of achieve strategic objectives, improve the organization, and so forth. You know? So I became intrigued, and I was more and more curious about this internal auditing. I then, on my third year, decided to say, let me specialize on internal auditing. So I left then accounting. I specialized on internal auditing. In my third year, I relocated to Port Elizabeth, still with NMMU, because they have made the main campus that's there. And I think I became more passionate, such that even in the very same year, I then founded an association for internal audit students, right? We called it Dynamic Internal Audit Society at the time.
Wow.
You know? So the primary objective was to bridge the gap between students and industry. So some of the activities that we do was to seek vacation work for students, to take them, to expose them to internal audit shops. So we did engage with organizations to say, can we bring our group of internal auditors so that they can see how the life of an internal auditor looks like on a day-to-day basis, you know? So we did all of that. And I think as we were doing that, obviously doing it for other students, but it was also good for me to really, really immerse myself on this profession. And from there, I think the rest is history. I then went into fully becoming an internal auditor.
Wow, you're a trailblazer. I like that you started something that was not there. You saw the need and you started it and made sure that it's there, and to help the other generations that come. Just out of interest, is that organization still there?
Yeah, actually, what I didn't mention was that. So the organization is still there.
Okay.
But it has changed its name now. It's sort of merged, I think, with the Accounting Association. So it has changed the name. But also that association also benefited me because what we were wanting to do at the time was to make it a national association so that it does not become just an NMMU thing, but it becomes a national. So we started engaging with other universities. We engaged with the Valley University of Technology at the time, who had something similar. We engaged with the University of Pretoria. I think theirs was called House Internal Audit at the time. And then we started having conferences or being invited to their conferences. That is the Pretoria side. And I think that's where I was also spotted by Ernst & Young because I gave a presentation there, and they were like, we need to get this young man into our house. And that's how I was introduced into the career of internal audit.
No, that's great. That's awesome. And then so at that time, were you aware of Institute of Internal Auditors?
Yeah, I was. So there was the regional structure in Port Elizabeth, which I also joined. So as part of me running this Internal Audit Association for students, so the chairperson at the time happened to be my lecturer, who's a professor now at the university. And he asked that, we are formulating an advisory board at the campus, so would like to also have a student voice. So I was then sitting in that advisory board, and that's how I got exposed to even the institute, to say, actually, there's a body of internal auditors that's called the Institute of Internal Auditors. And for me, it was then to say, okay, how do I align with this particular body of internal auditors? I sat there at that advisory board, and I would then constantly attend activities of the IIA at the regional level. So, and I think that was just then natural for me. When I came to Johannesburg, I was then looking to say, okay, where is the regional body for IIA here in Johannesburg? I then found the Johannesburg region. I became a member of it. Ultimately, I became the chairperson of that region for 4 years. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think it was a step-by-step. Everything was just almost as if it was planned, but I guess it was just God's will.
Indeed, it sounds as if it's something that was calculated, something that was, planned. It's amazing how it all worked out so perfectly for you. Okay, and then now fast forward to now. So from this body that you found, and then joining, the regional structures of internal audit. Now you are a board member of the Institute of Internal Auditor in South Africa, the national structure. How has your experience been?
Yeah. I think my experience has been interesting because our role as board members is one, to protect the image and the reputation of the organization. Two, to preserve the profession, because one might say that we are sort of the custodian of the internal audit profession, because through us we set the standards, we set the code of ethics, we set the behavioral expectations of internal auditors, etc. So I think that's our role, and obviously to also oversee the strategy formulation and strategy execution internally. So I think that has been good to sort of play that particular role. And that's just at the level of the board, because then I also, through time, became then the chairperson of the audit committee. And in the audit committee, I think my role is more pronounced around making sure that we oversee the internal financial controls. We sort of hold the executive accountable in terms of the financial standing, making sure that we also use funds in a prudent way. But generally that we run the organization in the way that members are also proud that the organization is running the right way. So I think, my role has been interesting. It's been, I think I'm going to my 4th year now, as you said, it's my second stint. And I'm happy with the contribution that I've made. And I think we've had our own hurdles, but we overcame them. When we look at the institute now, we're happy that we managed to even find the CEO at the level of the Leadership Academy, which is a subsidiary. We also managed to appoint the first CEO of that organization, which is good. Those are some of the achievements that through my tenure we managed to make.
That's amazing. I want us now to talk about the standards, right? I know there's new standards that were introduced. We had a number of sessions last year about the standards to sort of critique and go through and raise questions and so on. Well, what are your views on this, on the whole process and perhaps the actual standards?
Yeah, I think from a process point of view, the process was good. I mean, the process was transparent. The process made sure that we solicit views from multiple stakeholders, right? Be it from a student point of view, professional auditors, chief audit executives, board members, CEOs, management, and so forth. So that was good because then you have a comprehensive viewpoint with which to base then the standard. But it's also forward-looking to say how do we then envisage the profession to be for the next 5 years, 10 years, right? So, I mean, if you look at this standard now and the previous standard before then, there's a huge gap in terms of how frequent, because the standard is not something that you change quite frequent. So you want to make sure that they can then stand the test of time for the next predefined period, 10 years or so. But I think the standards are quite clear. The standards are quite clear. They're specific. I think there's less ambiguity as well. Yes. There were a lot of ambiguities in the previous ones. For instance, if you look at now the 5 domains, they're very clear in terms of domain 1 around the provision of risk-based advice, assurance, contributing in terms of improving the strategic objective or helping the organization achieve their strategic objectives. If you look at around how we govern the internal audit function, managing the internal audit function, performing internal audit services, and then as well as then now what we call then the ethics, the domain that focuses on ethics and professionalism, which then sets the behavioral expectations of internal auditors, right? I mean, that's an enhancement from what we had previous in terms of the code of ethics, right? But I think now it's much more pronounced in terms of what we expect. But 2 other things that I just want to highlight is around also the relationship between a chief audit executive, the board / the audit committee. I think it's much more clearer in terms of what those expectations are, right? And how then you engage or you relate with those particular bodies. What's also much more clearer now is around the expectations of a chief audit executive. You know, what is the caliber of an individual that we want in that particular position? From a qualifications, experience, I think it's more pronounced, right? And that sets us also on a right trajectory in terms of what we want around to professionalize internal audit, to regulate internal audit ultimately, because at least now in the standards, we have then the experience requirement and the qualification requirements that are already defined. So what we need is a much more adoption by regulators of the standards, and then that sets us on that trajectory, as I said, of ultimately regulating the profession.
Interesting you should say that. It actually delves to what I was talking about earlier, that it's interesting to see someone who's moved up the ranks from an internal audit point of view, as opposed to taking someone from different function and just putting them there as the CAE without even understanding what internal audit means. And often we see in the market when they want even an audit manager, sometimes they would want maybe a CA person or someone who's done accounting and so forth, without drawing a distinct difference between an internal auditor or an accountant, as it were. So how important is that as now regulated with the new standards?
No, it's important. And I mean, that's a bigger debate, right? Because I mean, it goes back to the foundations that we wanted to say. We need to guide, especially as the Institute of Internal Auditors, we need to guide this internal audit profession, but more specific, guide the designation internal audit. So if someone calls themselves internal audit, there needs to be a particular criteria assessment that they would have then passed for them to be called internal auditor, similar to an accountant or a chartered accountant. You don't just call yourself an accountant, right? So for us, I think we've been laxed to say, okay, you go, you study internal audit, that's it, right? But I think it's much more clearer. One is obviously to attain the designation of CIA, Certified Internal Auditor, but also there's also this adhere to the code of ethics, etc., etc. So that's important, so that when we put even job advertisement, right? And we put in CIA. We know that there's credence, and CIA and CA are also sort of on an equivalent state, of which currently people would want to promote CA more than just a CIA. But if you think about it, they should be more or less in the same standing.
Yeah.
But it is about us being more deliberate in terms of how we sort of grow those internal auditors from ground up until attaining their CIAs and so forth.
All right. So, with the same breath, I just want us to delve on what the standards would require. For instance, they would say you need a mixture of skills within your internal audit function, right? Are we not then risking us not having that mixture by stipulating the kind of person that we want? For instance, if you look at legislation like Sarbanes-Oxley, it would say you need to have one financial expert or finance expert, as it were. So how are we managing that mixture?
Yeah, thanks. And that's a key question. I mean, ordinarily, when you are running or leading an internal audit function, you are going to have a diversity of skills, right? Because you are going to have people focused primarily on internal audit, sort of could be operational, giving assurance on operational activities and so forth. You are going to need expertise on finance matters. Someone who can audit and know their way around the balance sheet, income statement, etc. You are going to need IT expertise, right? And that takes us to perhaps now there's other professional bodies that provide that particular qualification. I know even us as the IIA, we're making strides in providing an IT-specific qualification, but you need someone who can give you assurance on network security, on cyber security, on ITGCs and so forth, which a CIA would have a basic understanding of all of these fields that I've just mentioned now. But then you would also need someone then who's a much more specialist, someone who can do penetration testings, etc., right? You would also need someone who's a skilled individual on data analytics, for instance, or automation, depending on the state of your organization. So from an internal audit function point of view, you are going to have a diversity of skills. But then what I like is that the CIA exposes you to all of these fields, right? So you become a well-equipped, holistic auditor that can give assurance on a particular components of risk.
Awesome. All right. And then let's move then to, I want us to move to the value that internal audit as a function brings to a whole lot of different things. So currently we are, the elections are nearby in South Africa, and we are looking forward to the general elections in May. So how would we say, is there a role perhaps that internal audit can play in elections generally?
The direct answer is yes. And I mean, as internal auditors, it's important that when the first step that we follow when we do our work is to do risk identification, risk assessment, risk analysis, right? Or broadly, just risk assessment, because then it entails all of those: risk identification, evaluation, assessment, etc. Now, what are the things that are likely to happen during an election season? You are going to have an increase in budget, right? In budget, what are the provisions? You are going to likely have an increase in spending because then people want to deliver. I mean, elections are all about delivery of services to people, right? So you might have a backlog of services, but during election season, you are going to then have an expedited delivery of services across, right? So you are going to see that. We are likely going to see, obviously, a lot of activism, even from a leadership point of view. So those are the things that when we then look at our risk assessment, we then point to say, okay, this and this is likely to increase. What are the risks that we see here? There's a risk that budget might increase, money might probably not go where it's supposed to be, but it might be purported to have went where it's supposed to be. You might have a risk even from a spending point of view, where there's spent, but things are probably not reaching where they are supposed to be. So you look at then all of those risk factors, and then that's where we're supposed to focus on as internal audit. I probably, in my view, see I mean, when you run an internal audit function, you balance between assurance, providing assurance services, providing advisory or consulting services, and then as well as, depending again on your organization, investigation services, right? So I probably see more advisory services and consulting being pronounced, more pronounced during an election service, where you then sit in with management, or actually you should ordinarily be part of the conversations with management, but being more advisory in terms of their spending, in terms of even those budget formulation, budget spending. I mean, that's the role that I think we should play more, but not negating that or neglecting that there's also the element of assurance. So the role is still there, but we need to guide against also finding that there's resources that may be too consumed during the election season, such that after elections, then organizations are bankrupt. There's no funds to still continue delivering services to people.
And you also don't see that same haste of that service delivery post the election.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. And then perhaps let's talk then about the value, right? And a lot of the organizations, I don't want to say companies, a lot of organizations would argue that commercially it doesn't make sense to have an internal audit function, right? And it really doesn't, it's not quantifiable. You can't quantify how much an internal audit or internal audit function actually, saves or brings into the organization. Particularly looking at how elections work, how would we say otherwise as internal auditors? How would we prove our case to say, listen, we do actually add value?
Value is in the eyes of the beholder, right? I mean, value can be subjective. What you see as value, I might not see it, and vice versa. Right? But I think for me, it is about internal audit, or the role of internal audit is about, one, connecting the dots for management, but more than just connecting the dots, also holding the mirror for the organization so that they can reflect on how they are doing, whether performing against their strategic objectives, performing against their mandate, how they adhere to regulatory requirements, etc. So you as an internal auditor, you hold that mirror back to them to say, actually, in this and these quadrants, this is how you are performing. And we see that actually more effort should be directed on this and this field. Remember, management's role should be to execute and to deliver. And ours is to then be able to caution and make sure that there's risk and rewards, right? As we are pushing rewards, as we're delivering, are we also managing risk in the right way, right? So we give that assurance to them to say, yes, you are delivering, but we think that in your delivery, you are actually not adhering to this and this particular regulatory requirements, or you are not, I mean, there's a better way of delivering some of the services in a much more, perhaps, cost conservative, right? Because we are independent. As we are independent, we understand the organization, and we should be able to then take a stand back and be able to see certain things that management might not be able to see. And it's then upon us to be then highlighting some of those things to say, management, that we feel that this and this is not going in the way that it should. So I think that then buckets in terms of providing advice, providing insight, providing foresight. And the foresight is really about using the information that we have at our disposal to can anticipate certain things or project certain things that we see that based on particular trends, it might go in this way. And same as elections. I mean, we're not having elections for the first time. Right? We've been having elections, local government elections, provincial, national elections. So we know the trends, we know the patterns that during election season, what happens? There's going to be a change of leadership. It's bound to happen. It's inevitable. There's going to be a change in leadership. And from a change in leadership, there's a couple of things that also change. Right? It is about us also as internal auditors being able to advise management and being able to set the organization in such a way that there's minimal hurdles when leadership changes, because an organization must be stable.
Funny you should say that, because I read in the Auditor General's report on the local government audits, the emphasis there was on ethical leadership that we are in dire need of. Another emphasis was on a breakdown of processes, as it were. So how important is it that we as internal audit, speaks the right message to the top? Because at the end of the day, I feel ethics, they start from the tone at the top. Obviously, if the tone is not for ethics, then the organization is highly likely that it won't be.
Yeah.
So what role can we play as internal audit in influencing that?
Yeah. So this is it's a good question. But I think it does not start with us. Yes, there's a huge role for us to play as internal auditors, and I'll get back to that. But if you really think about it, whether private or public sector, and more in the public sector, I think it also starts with the shareholder.
Yeah.
Right? The whole shareholder being clear in terms of what is it that we want. Shareholder being able to appoint then the right caliber individuals in boards. Because then if you do not have the right board that encourages and that promotes ethical leadership, then you are likely going to have executive management that might not respect ethics, law, compliance, etc. Right? So I think it goes in that way, from shareholder, appointing the right board, people who really would understand their fiduciary mandate, people who are honest, etc., and then being able to appoint then the right executive. But us as internal auditors, our role is to make sure that there's a yes, you spoke about the tone of the top, but how do you also set that tone? There's things around what is this thing? Culture, right? Is the organizational culture defined? If the organizational culture is not, then we should be able to then steer that conversation, right? Whether we do an assessment, a culture assessment in the organization, being able to share with management to say, this is the culture of this organization. Is this really what we want? Is this really what we want to be known as the organization, right? And if there is a particular defined culture, then we review that culture. But I think one, culture is important. Culture is really how the organization does things. And then from culture, everything else comes in, right? In terms of making sure that one, the behavioral standing or of people conducted themselves in a way that aligns with our code of ethics, code of conduct, etc. And some of those things might not even be established. There's a lot of organizations where you find that there's no code of conduct, etc. So it's about then guiding organizations in terms of establishing all of those things. But when you do a really culture assessment, it will bring it back to what is it that you need to do for you to have then a defined culture. You have to establish this. You have to have a social and ethics committee that then oversees all of these. Or you enhance your mandate from the HR committee so that they also deal with the ethics-related matters. But it is about really doing that culture assessment firstly. And just then to the listeners who are also listening to this, there's a lot of maturity assessments out there that are available free of charge that you can follow. Right? Because that would then say to you, when you do your assessment, if this and this and this is not present, then your organization would probably be here. But for you to improve your culture journey, these are some of the things that you need to do.
Awesome. And then, so with elections comes change in leadership, right? And we often see this in the public sector where you get a completely new leadership in a specific department. How does that affect the whole department from an audit point of view? Would you say internal auditors are protected in that sense? Or would we say maybe there needs to be amendments in legislation and things like that? But what I mean is, for instance, if you have a new DG, you have a new minister, they appoint, their new people. How does that affect the operations? Because you may have audited, right, and be at a certain stage of your work, and then comes new leadership who are completely oblivious to the issues that the department is looking at or is facing. How do we then ready the internal audit for that change in leadership and to keep the momentum going?
So that's a key question, and it goes back to what I said earlier around having stakeholder or shareholder expectations clearly defined, appointing the right boards, the right board of directors, and then the board then being able to appoint then the executive. Because if you have that structure working and working well, mature, then even if you have a change in executive, perhaps it shouldn't really disrupt a lot from a governance point of view. So obviously people come in with their own preferences and so forth, but it is important to have that stability from a leadership point of view. And equally, if you have a strong executive, you then don't have a board, the organization should be stable. But I mean, to answer your question much more directly, changes of leadership do affect not just internal auditors, it affects the whole organization. You would have perhaps a CEO, an executive that appreciates and understands internal audit and the mandate of internal audit and the difference between internal audit and external audit, right? And why internal audit must be part of every conversation, including strategic conversations, etc. But then you might equally have a leadership that absolutely does not see value in the internal audit and sees internal audit as being police and wanting to only identify the wrong things, right? So it's about those. But if you have a board, right, that is very clear on the role and the value of internal audit. You have an audit committee that is firm, and the audit committee that can then keep the executive in check. I think then you'd have minimal hurdles, as I said earlier, right? But yeah, we need to caution that, and I think as internal audit is about one, making sure that we've got a well-defined charter, well-defined relationship with the audit committee, and that's the role that we need to strengthen. I think if I can't emphasize this enough. The role of the audit committee is important, and having the right people in the audit committee is important, because if you don't, then it might then destroy the credibility of internal audit. But if you have strong individuals there, then they will be able to then protect the integrity of internal audit. But being able to also, because remember, audit committee is removed from executive matters. So they are independent, and they could be able to then guide, even where there's potential conflict, which there will be conflict between the executive, more management, and the internal audit. The audit committee should be able to provide that counsel in terms of how we deal with particular matters or how we resolve potential conflicts. But if the audit committee themselves don't understand the value of internal audit, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, indeed. So what I hear from your response is that governance is important.
Absolutely.
Governance structures, and also the stakeholder management. Because as you say, you may have a leader that actually understands what internal audit is and what it does and appreciates it. And then you have someone who completely has no idea what internal audit does, and they think you're just there to audit them, to find the wrong things. So it's important then as an auditor to be able to sell yourself, to resell yourself to those people, to say, listen, this is what internal audit, we're actually here to assist you, as opposed to, being the police, as it were.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so I just want to ask you a question. It's a very light-hearted question. What do you have to break before you can use?
What do I have to break
before you can use?
Sure. What do I have to break before I can use? It's a trick question, this one.
It is.
Okay. Are there any clues?
It's round and it rolls, I suppose. It's something that you eat, I think.
You break before you can use. Oh, okay. That would be what? An egg for breakfast?
Definitely an egg.
You know, auditors have got this thing of complicating questions.
Yes.
So when you ask, even if it's a simple question, then we would want to complicate it because
Thinking
deep.
Thinking, what do I have to break the structures?
Yeah,
processes. No, I just wanted to bring some bit of humor there, lightness. Just to bring it back.
Sure.
So you mentioned a very important aspect about leadership, right, and the governance structures. There's one municipality I will never forget this, where there was a change in leadership, as it were. This was post-elections.
Yeah.
And then they discarded all the committees that were there. Your audit committee, and those are the very important governance structures we're talking about. And in an instance like that, it's very difficult now to, keep the fire burning, as it were, because you are right in the middle of a cycle, and then you get new people that are completely doing, a different thing. How would we then guard against that? How would we ensure that even though we have strong people, the strong governance structures in place, but they also, threatened by the change in political climate? How do we maneuver that?
So, and that's really a reality, more pronounced in the public sector. I mean, we're going to an election season now. There's likely going to be leadership changes. There's likely going to be some of those changes. I think with leadership, with governance or leadership broadly, there's always an element of instability that we need to always guard against. But I think for me, it will always go back to really the caliber of the people and the caliber of the leaders we elect at different stages, right? I have my own personal views in terms of the caliber, the quality of the leadership that as a country we have. And I'm not just talking politics. No. I'm talking generally, whether it's leadership in business, whether it's leadership in church, it's leadership generally in all facets of the economy. I think it's something that we need to really relook in terms of what does it mean, what does it entail to be a leader, and what are some of those attributes that we as South Africa, we want to emulate in our own leadership structures, right, regardless of where you might find yourself in a leadership position. So I think that in itself then will then create some sort of much more clarity and much more stability. But it is a risk that we must always guard against. And I mean, we can have our own safeguards. But I mean, if you have a change in the political landscape, it's likely to filter down. So as I said, more pronounced in the public sector than in the private. In the private sector, I think it does happen when you have a change in the shareholding structure. You either maybe you have now a major shareholder who would come with their own expectations, and they might not align with the governance structure setting. Some of those things do happen.
But perhaps to educate the public as well of their shareholder status, I think would assist, because I think a lot of these things, they can happen because the shareholder is not involved, which is the public.
Absolutely.
Particularly in the public sector.
Absolutely.
I think, of course, if the public knows about governance structures within their own municipality, it's easy to guard against that. Even if you have new political leadership, you still maintain the same governance structures there, and that can only come through the shareholder.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right. I mean, it's being alive to what's happening around us as individuals, as citizens, as community members, right? If there's a municipality, obviously here's a municipality where you stay. I mean, being alive to what's happening, dynamics within that, and as a citizen, being alive to what's happening in the country, such that then we take an active posture than a passive one, right? So I think when we're more active, then we have a bigger voice, and then we're able to sort of, some of these things would not happen as pronounced as they do.
So, a leadership in any country, right, or in any direction that a country can take depends on its leadership.
Absolutely.
In this economy that we have today, in these times, the issues that we have with everything that's going on in our country, what type of leadership would you say we need going forward? And how important is it for everyone to apply their minds when they go to that ballot on the 29th to actually make sure that they get that type of a leader?
Yeah. So I think just speaking on the qualities, describing some of the qualities of leadership that I think we need as a country, especially now, Because like I said, I mean, we need to relook at leadership as a concept in the country. I've seen deteriorating quality of leadership across the board, and we need to guard against that. That's a risk in itself. But I think we need ethical leadership. We need leadership that's honest. I mean, honesty seems to be something that's difficult to find nowadays. People just don't tell the truth. So you need some people who are honest. You need men and women of integrity. You need people who are beyond reproach. But you need people that really understand and care for what they're doing. If I am a chief audit executive in my organization, then I should care about my role. I should care about the impact, directly and indirectly, that my role has on my immediate team and the organization, right? So I think that's what we need. Those are some of the qualities I think that we need. But we also need brave leadership. We need decisive leadership. You need the ability to be able to take decisions, right? Some decisions might be unpopular, but nonetheless, we need to take decisions so that we move forward, right, as a country. So for me, that's how I would summarize to say, even as we go forward in terms of these upcoming elections, those are the qualities that we should be on the lookout for. Let's look out for people that really have the interest of the country, people that are able to take us forward, people that are transparent in their approach, men and women of integrity, people that are decisive, right? But people that we believe can really bring about the necessary changes in our country to take our country forward. So that's what I think we need and we should be on the lookout for.
Awesome. So, okay, I have another riddle for you before you go on, just to keep it lighthearted.
Yeah.
What has branches but no fruits?
Branches but no fruits. Huh.
And now you have to not think about with your internal audit.
I must take my internal audit head out.
So let me rephrase it. It has branches but no fruits. It has no trunks or leaves.
Branches, no fruits, no leaves, no trunks, no leaves.
You know this one.
Okay. What kind of a tree would that be?
So I think the first thing is you're thinking of a tree and it's not a tree.
Okay, I know.
It's where you work. It's a bank.
Oh, okay.
Get it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's indeed a bank. Okay, so as we round up our conversation, I want us to now talk to the up and coming internal auditor that's at home, someone who doesn't even know what internal audit is. Maybe they bump into this video by chance.
Yeah.
What would you say succinctly? What is internal audit, and how can one develop passion for it?
Yeah. So I think for me, internal audit is a career or a profession that allows you to come in and understand an organization, because you work within an organization and you understand the end-to-end of a particular organization. So it helps you to understand the organization. It helps you to be able to contribute in terms of the improvement of that organization. And the reason why I'm saying it helps you to improve is because you are independent, right? You are the only person that's independent inside the organization, except for obviously external auditors that would come. But internal audit, in terms of we have our unique perspective or unique positioning in that, we were able to then provide independent thoughts, right? And we are then also objective in terms of how we do our work. So really, the field of internal audit allows you to understand the organization, to be able to then contribute in terms of improving the standing of the organization, in terms of improving the strategy execution of the organization, but most importantly, being able to assist the organization to manage also risk, right? Because it's always risk and controls, right? You have controls to mitigate particular risk that might happen, right? So that is really in how I would then simplify internal audit in a nutshell. Is that particular field that allows one to come in and contribute in terms of helping the organization to achieve its objectives. And we do this by obviously doing what we call audits, and we give assurance, right? Because you might be doing an audit that you think is small, but it goes up to even independent directors who are then going to receive all of these reports, and they use that. Remember what I said earlier around holding the mirror to the organization so that they see how they perform. So that's what the independent directors are going to look at. They look at that report and say, okay, based on this, how is management performing, right? So we are the only independent people that can state in terms of this is the performance of the organization, obviously, except other people that come externally. Other than assurance, we obviously are able to advise the organization on a couple of matters. And then we are able to also investigate certain things. So depending, obviously, on the mandate of your internal audit function. But it is an exciting field, forever evolving field. And what I liked when I started in this career of internal audit compared to external audit was that you do different things. I mean, today you might be auditing finance, tomorrow you might be auditing operations or branches. You might be auditing branches, you might be auditing strategy. So you never stop learning, because then you audit different kinds of things. But whereas when you are an external auditor, I mean, your focus is predominantly financial statements review, right? And it's just that the only change will just be maybe organization to organization. But internal audit, you audit different kinds of things within the organization. So, I love this field. I've been in it for over 10 years now, and it is a field that I plan to continue, and I would encourage even upcoming auditors to really cement themselves in this field.
Interesting. You say you audit different things. Now there's new phenomena like ESG, and you get to audit that as well. And particularly with that, how do you, if you're not aware of what ESG is, how do you then audit something that you're not aware?
Yeah.
Where do you begin?
Yeah. The nice thing again with having organizations like the Institute is that we have a lot of guidance, right? Whether it's position papers, whether it's research papers, that would then advise you on how to approach a particular matter that might be new. So, I mean, people can visit the IIA website, and what I like is that the IIA website is also linked now to the global IIA website. So we do have sort of position papers, we do have white papers, we have a lot of guidance on ESG in terms of what is ESG first and foremost, right? How does it see itself? What are the key things to be on the lookout for on ESG? I think now the focus is on governance, right? And governance and reporting, because there's a lot of people that report on ESG matters, but actually when you're like, okay, but show me the evidence, show me the credence of what you are reporting on, it's not forthcoming, right? So, but yeah, the position papers will guide you in terms of what are the key things to be on the lookout for, not just on ESG, on any matter. I mean, there was a buzzword not too long ago around artificial intelligence. Again, you'd find it, there's position papers, so that there was a buzzword around digitization. You'd find it there. Culture itself was a buzzword at some point. I remember around 2017, there was a lot of culture, there was a lot of agility, right? So some of those things that you would find position papers for. But this is also a call to those experienced auditors or those who are doing research to say, I mean, if there's a particular topic that you're interested in, you can write. that, and you can also submit to the institute, right? We do have a criteria in terms of how you can write articles on behalf of the IIA, and I'm sure that can be availed. Those who are interested can approach the IIA for that. So you can write position papers on any area of your interest, and then submit to the IIA, and then the IIA will obviously review that, and then we'll publish also those things. I mean, I remember during COVID, we also wrote articles in terms of internal audit functions, the impact of COVID on internal audit, how must internal audit configure themselves, because COVID was new. People did not know how do we audit when we're working from home, etc. But and there was no guidance whatsoever. But people had to write, and people wrote research papers, and those are the research papers that a lot of people used then to navigate that particular situation. So even now, if there's an auditor who wants to write about elections, the role of internal audit in an election season, please feel free, submit your papers to the institute, and the institute will review and publish those papers. I think the motto of the institute for the longest time was progress through sharing. Right, it is about how we share our knowledge with others that then empowers each other.
So being a member then of the Institute of Internal Auditors have helped you tremendously, I mean, throughout your career, as you said,
yeah.
from the organization or association that you formed at university all the way until where you are now. How would you encourage someone to, join and make sure that their membership is paid up and they're part of the team?
Yeah. So you're right. Step number one is just joining. Step number two would be to also be active, so that you're not just a member, but you're not active. So joining, being active in terms of attending even events of the institute. If you are interested in writing, or you're a writer, you write. So you find your own way of how you can contribute, right? But also take up qualifications of the institute. I mean, for me, I have the CIA, I have the PIA, I have the IET, because I have the, the PQA, Performing Effective Quality Assessments, because I mean, it was to say, okay, I need to make sure that I acclimatize myself in terms of the different designations that are there, and because each teaches you something new, right? So, but yeah, I think for me, I would really encourage people to join and be active in the institute and contribute in terms of improving our profession.
So we are often seen as very serious people as internal audit. How would you argue against that myth, if it is a myth? Or would you say we're just okay?
Yeah, I think what we do is serious, but we do have fun. Yeah. So, but I think we should try to have fun. I think I do encourage my team also to say we can't always be working. We need to have moments of fun. But yeah, many a times we find ourselves going in our corners of being serious. I think it goes with the job and the information and what we have to deal with. But we need to find time to also have fun as internal auditors. And I think also the institute creates those opportunities for us to have fun, because you mingle with other like-minded professionals, and then we also have fun in that way. Yeah.
What would you want to be remembered as?
Sure. I think I would want to be remembered as someone who came into the profession, made an immense contribution in the profession, right? I mean, I've just outlined my history in terms of how I joined the profession, how I became interested in internal auditing to where I am now. I think I've learned a lot. Personally, I've grew a lot, but I've contributed equally a lot. So I would want to be remembered as that young individual who came in, showed up, stepped up, and was able to then make the contribution that I've made. But equally, I think I want to also encourage young people to say, I think it's really possible. it's really possible. Your dreams are valid and your dreams are achievable. The only thing that we need to do is to step up, to show up. And whatever little thing that you do counts, right? Because, sometimes you do something not knowing who's watching, right? And there could be a lot of people that are watching, and based on your efforts, based on how you deliver your work, based on how you portray yourself, people would just be charmed by that and be willing to give you opportunities. We have a lot of people that are skilled, and it's good for us to be technically skilled, but equally your attitude matters. How you portray yourself, how you show up yourself, how you conduct yourself is equally important. So those are some of the things that I think we need to be on the lookout for. Many a times, and even I think our own qualifications are not doing justice also to the holistic character of an individual that we need to build. I think there's a huge focus on technical skills, less focus on even soft skills, right? How you communicate. Sure, some of the things we read out there, they're also shocking, but it's important in terms of how we communicate, in terms of how you present yourself. So just focusing on really soft skills, how you analyze situations, etc. So I think those are some of the things that internal auditors must be on the lookout for, as some of the characteristics that are good, that would grow one. But yeah, for me, I would want to be remembered as someone that has made a contribution in the life of the profession and as well as the institute.
Incredible. Thokozani, keep shining. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for taking time to listen to us. I hope you've gained as much as I have. Great insights we got from our guest today. So there's events that are coming up very soon. The Young Leaders Network that's happening on the 6th of September. The Institute of Internal Auditors National Conference that's happening in August. You can also visit the website for more information on that. Please be on the lookout. Please join. And we're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much and goodbye.